Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to the Writing Witch podcast. In today's video, I'm sharing with you some helpful tips on how to start your Green Witch apothecary and get started on your green witchcraft journey. Whether you're brand new to the witchy path overall, or if you're a seasoned witch who's just leaning more into the green witchcraft side of things, this video will help you get clear on the foundations of your own unique green witch practice. And as with all things on my channel and my podcast, it's all about discovering what feels most magical and most useful to you. But for inspiration, I'll also be sharing some of my favorite essential herbs that have been with me since the beginning of my journey as a green witch. Thank you so much for coming to sit for a spell with me today. If you're new around here, hi, I'm Afura, the Writing Witch, and I create content on how to see the magical in the mundane, how to cultivate rituals that actually work for you, and how to ask yourself powerful questions to experience more pleasure and fulfillment in your everyday life. While you're here, I'll be so grateful if you can leave a like below and hit the alarm bell and the subscribe button so that my next video doesn't get lost in your algorithm. So first things first, there are no hard and fast rules for what your top 10 essential herbs in your green witch practice should be. This list will differ for everyone based on what kind of green witch you are, as well as what your needs, desires, and personal connection to certain plants might happen to be. Remember, the most important aspect of being a green witch is cultivating a deep and intuitive relationship with nature and with the plant kingdom. Trust your instincts and explore the plants that resonate with you on a spiritual and energetic level. The point of this exercise is to get clear with yourself on where you're at in your journey to form relationships with plants in your life. It's important to remember that even if you're brand new to calling yourself a green witch or new to the witchy practice overall, you almost certainly already have a relationship with various types of plants. Whether it's the calming presence of a houseplant, the soothing scent of lavender, or the taste of fresh herbs in your cooking, plants have likely already made their way into your life in some way. Embrace these connections and use them as a starting point to deepen your understanding and appreciation for the magical properties of plants. So to begin, I invite you to make a written list of 10 types of plants that you have any kind of relationship with. It can be and should be whatever 10 plants happen to come to mind first. And there's a reason why we're doing it this way without overthinking it. It's because most likely the very first 10 plants that do come to mind will be the ones you either already have the strongest relationships with or that you're currently feeling intuitively called to. This exercise allows you to tap into your intuition and connect with the plants that resonate with you on a deeper level. Trust your instincts and let your subconscious guide you to create this list. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers here, only the plants that hold significance for you. So take a moment, grab a pen and paper, and let your mind wander as you jot down the names of these 10 plants. And to make this process feel like a simple, easy, and magical ritual, I've designed a lovely Book of Shadows page for you to use as a guide. It includes a gorgeous illustration page for your grimoire or witchy journal, as well as a journal prompt section and a space for you to write about your top 10 plants as a green witch. This is a little free gift I have for you as an instant printable download. It's available at the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below. The link will take you to my Patreon page where you'll be able to view and download these pages as a free user. But while you're over there, I also invite you to hit the follow button so that you'll receive a notification every time I make one of these free posts. So for some inspiration, I'll share with you my top 10 plants that come to mind, and I actually used one of my favorite divination methods to create this list: automatic writing. This is where you set the intention to not overthink your answers and just write down whatever comes to mind first as quickly as possible without really stopping to think much about it at all. This allows the subconscious mind to come forth and communicate what your intuition wants to share. So the plants on my list were mint, lavender, tea, coffee, houseplants, beets, thyme, chamomile, squash, and apple. So as you can see, there's quite a seemingly random assortment of things here. Some of which are garden/culinary herbs that also have very common magical associations. Others of which are normally thought of as mundane foods. And then there's my blanket statement of houseplants, which I didn't even list individually by species. But when we move on to the next part of this magical journaling exercise, we'll extract our own magical meanings out of each of these plants or groups of plants. Once you have your list of 10 plants that come to mind first, the next step is to write down a few sentences about what each of these 10 plants means to you. And again, there are no right or wrong answers here. Your connections to these plants may seem totally mundane at first, in the sense that you're not necessarily casting dramatic spells with them in a cauldron. But when we look at our seemingly mundane habits with a lens of mindfulness, we see that this is the makings of our own natural forms of magic. That's what witchcraft is really all about, finding the sacred in the everyday and recognizing the power and energy that exists in even the simplest of things and the simplest of habits. So take some time to reflect on how these plants have influenced your life, whether it's through their scent, taste, or even just their presence in your environment. Embrace the magic that already exists within you and let it guide you on your green witch journey. So here are some of my answers for inspiration. Number 1 is mint. Mint is one of those herbs that I think of first because it's one of the first herbs that I actually had personal experience growing and foraging. When I was a preteen, my parents owned some land out in the country, and we'd spend time there connecting with nature some weekends in the summer. Being at least second and third generation city folk, this was a huge learning experience for my siblings and I, as well as my parents. My dad was an environmental conservation officer at the time, so he was learning a lot about nature, which he was passing along to us. My mom wasn't much of a nature girl in the whole camping and roughing it kind of way, but she was a trooper. But she's always been curious about natural remedies and traditional survival skills. She and all of us kids were always lovers of animals, and my younger siblings and I were just obsessed with nature in general. One of our favorite things about going camping on this land was getting to learn about and to forage for wild edible plants. On one of our first visits there, my dad found wild mint growing in the brush. I believe he discovered it while mowing a section of the lawn around our trailer. I think the strong, unmistakable smell of mint must have come up, and so after he finished mowing, we went looking with him and found lots and lots of mint growing around us. Once we got the campfire going and the hot sun went down, we cozied up by the fire with cups of fresh mint tea. What this memory represents for mint in my practice is the way it's strong, vigorous, and happy to take over a sunny landscape rapidly, even in blazing heat. But yet at the same time, to us, it's relaxing, refreshing, and also invigorating somehow at the same time. It embodies both quote-unquote masculine and quote-unquote feminine energy in an interesting way. I use it in my practice when I've been working hard to expand myself in life and need to take a break to relax and reflect on how far I've come. That first encounter with wild mint has always been a special childhood memory for me, but it's even more so now that my dad has passed earlier this year. While mint used to just generally represent the perseverance of nature and having a relaxing cup of tea, now it also holds the added layer of meaning of my dad having been the one who showed me how to connect with nature when I was young, and mainly how to survive in it and balance fun with hard work in nature to make the experience possible. My relationship with my dad was always kind of complicated because in some ways we couldn't have been more different. But since his passing, I've really been appreciating the ways in which we were alike and how his relationship with nature helped pave the way for mine and my siblings. And now mint is linked to that whole concept for me. Mint also connects me with my mom, as she's always been a bit of an herbal witch herself, even though she would never actually call herself that in those words. Years later, after selling that country property to pay for a better home in the suburbs of our city, my mom started her first herb garden in our new yard. For many years prior, we had been living in city houses with only tiny strips of grass between the homes and the sidewalks, and our only escape to nature were the times when we were able to get out to that country property. So this was a fun opportunity to connect more with nature closer to home. And of course, like many eager gardeners before her, my mom made that fatal mistake of planting mint in the yard. She really tried to do it right too, by not planting it directly in the ground, but instead planting it inside a pot buried in the ground. But that sorry little terracotta pot wasn't enough to stop that mint from growing out and taking over a large chunk of the yard, as mint does. Even after she tried to pull it out from that spot, we'd still find sprigs of mint springing up here, there, and everywhere, even out of cracks in the blacktop on the side of the house where there wasn't any grass. When my sister really liked the cartoon Flapjack, she even named the garden mint Peppermint Larry. Years later, when we were both in college, we'd enjoy coming home on breaks and staying up late drinking Peppermint Larry tea together and catching up on life. And that's the thing about peppermint. Even though it kind of evokes a comfortable, relaxing feeling, it doesn't just straight up knock you out and put you to sleep like some other herbs do. You can use it while you're in an energizing situation to kind of balance your energy out and make you feel more relaxed. Even many years later, once my parents had moved away and I had moved back into that house temporarily for a few years as an adult, the beginnings of my witchy journey started with the descendants of that same old mint plant from way back when. I used it in my magical practice as a representation of perseverance, connection to nature, relaxation, connection with family, and the concept of putting down roots. When my family lost the house to foreclosure and I had to move back into a city apartment situation, I took some of the plant with me in a pot, hoping to use it as a sort of spell. My intention was to persevere through living in apartments while still staying as connected to nature as possible, until one day when I would be able to put Peppermint Larry back in the ground again, somewhere more permanent. Unfortunately, the plant didn't survive in the long run, as mint never does quite so well in a pot as it does on the ground. But that's okay. It's also a lesson in how growth doesn't always happen to be in an unbroken chain. Sometimes we have to start over, but that doesn't mean we're not right where we're meant to be, or that we won't be able to plant new seeds and grow strong once again. And for a new realization that's coming to me as I'm writing this, my own journal entry on mint, in light of putting words to how mint connects me to my family, and now even to my quote-unquote ancestors on the other side as it pertains to my dad, it also makes sense for mint to be a representation of family and ancestors to me. The reason mint can be so hard to stomp out once it gets rooted in your ground is because of the way it grows and reproduces. It has very strong roots and very long roots. And even if you think you've removed all of the aerial parts of the plant and broken up the roots, there are still always more roots than you can see. And they continue to form tubers, far-reaching underground stems, that can become roots for new shoots of mint plants, possibly quite far away from where the mother plant originally was. And they can survive and reproduce even if the original part of the plant doesn't. This reminds me of the way that whether we're close to or far from our ancestors and or our family, or even if they're gone from this world, we're still part of a chain in the circle of life. Okay, so that wasn't exactly a couple of sentences about my relationship with mint. It was pages and pages of journaling, admittedly. But sometimes that's how it is once we really get in the zone and start reflecting on and writing about our connotations for these plants. Are you like me? Can you not just write a couple of sentences? Well, here's what I'm going to do for those of us hardcore writing witches out there. This has inspired me to, immediately after recording this voiceover, go ahead and design a full set of journal pages to match the original free journal page that I showed you earlier in this video. Future Afura is showing that on the screen right now. If you'd like to go way deeper with this Green Witch journaling exercise, like apparently I'm doing in this video, I would love to invite you to join the Writing Witch Coven over on Patreon, where members will be receiving these additional Green Witch writing pages along with the Green Witch themed junk journaling ephemera from my shop and so much more. This is what we do in the Writing Witch Coven. I offer prompts to help guide us to deepen our connection with various parts of our path and practice, all while naturally building a gorgeous and authentic grimoire or book of shadows along the way. Some tiers even receive a beautiful handcrafted Book of Shadows binder in their first month of membership to fill with all the fun pages that we're doing together. And they get physical copies of the sheets mailed to them each month, so they don't even have to print them out. To sign up, I invite you to go to the link that's on the screen now, and it'll also be linked down below. Okay, so plant number 2, even though we're already this far into the video, is lavender. I'm going to try and keep them a little bit shorter from here on out, but we will see. So lavender is one of my very favorite plants as a whole. Not only is purple one of my favorite colors, but the smell and traditional magical and medicinal uses of lavender tend to naturally resonate with me. It's a calming yet invigorating herb, and it always brings up a fond chain of memories for me. Whether it's the soothing scent that fills the air when I walk through a lavender field, just kidding, I've literally never even seen a lavender field in my life, just keeping it real here, or the relaxing properties of lavender essential oil that help me unwind after a long day, this herb holds a special place in my heart. Lavender has been used for centuries, and possibly even millennia, in various cultures for its healing properties, including promoting relaxation, reducing anxiety, and aiding in sleep. It's also commonly used in spells and rituals for purification, protection, and attracting love and happiness. The versatility of lavender makes it a must-have herb for any witch's apothecary. Whether you're using it as a bath spell, drinking it in a tea, creating a sachet for peaceful dreams, or simply enjoying its fragrance in a homemade candle, lavender is a powerful and enchanting herb that can enhance your magical practice. On a more personal level, lavender reminds me of my mother. Lavender is both of our favorite herb, and she even used to use the word lavender in her email address back in the day. She also planted lavender in that yard I mentioned earlier along with the mint. And when I moved back in years later, it was still growing, although nowhere near as vigorous as the mint. Lavender to me is that comforting, nostalgic feeling of being quote-unquote at home, in a comforting space, in the kitchen, in ritual, or in nature. Even after moving far away from home and living miles away from my family, I continue using lavender oil as a relaxing, soothing herb to keep me feeling calm and grounded when life got hectic. This is one that I mainly use in essential oil or dried herb form because try as I might, I've never managed to keep a potted lavender alive. If you have, please tell me your secret. One of the most potent ways I like to connect with lavender, and with my green witch practice overall actually, is through the concept of scent psychology. Scientifically speaking, scent is one of the most potent triggers for memory, which is why herbal scents are so powerful as a magical tool. We can create rituals around fragrant herbs and plants that link together in a chain of memories as a way to tap into a specific type of energy or intention over and over again, building up magical potency as we go along. This deepens our connection to the natural world and enhances the effectiveness of our spells and rituals over time. Lavender is also that herb that just feels like me in herb form in a way. Lavender is said to be associated with the planet Mercury, with the element of air, and with the astrological signs of Gemini and Virgo. Learning this made so much sense to me because I've always known that I have very strong air in my birth chart and that lavender was my favorite plant, but I also learned in recent years that since Gemini is my rising sign, Mercury is my chart ruler. As I've gotten deeper into learning astrology, I've also discovered that Virgo, a sign of the nature priestess archetype, of the autumn equinox, and of harvest season as a whole, it's also my south node, a placement in astrology related to the natural gifts we're born into this life with. Virgo season is also my personal summer as per astrologer Tanae Stewart's celestial alchemy method, which I absolutely love. So I talked about this more in my recent video, Exploring Nature Magic, 10 Green Witch Practices You Can Do Today. In that video, I went deeper into how astrology and herbology are related, and how to use your birth chart to better understand and embrace the unique type of green witch that you are. I also mentioned in that video that I've learned how to read my chart more deeply and in a more self-care oriented way from my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow. She makes it easy to learn astrology by seamlessly tying it in with your most ideal, authentic self-care practice, with herbal magic, and with the seasons of the witch and the moon phases. And if you haven't already heard, Tanae and I, along with several other self-care oriented witches, are doing a free summit for the autumn equinox this upcoming week. We'll all be presenting on various ways to align your self-care practices with your witchy practices each season to maximize your power and fulfillment in life. I'll be presenting on how to align your desires for the year ahead with the powerful energies of the autumn season. And it's totally free to attend. It's coming up really soon on September 18th, and there will be some workshops on herbalism and plant magic, including how they're related to astrology if those are things you're interested in. So whether or not you can attend live, you'll be able to catch the replays of our workshops and our rituals up until September 27th if you're signed up. So I invite you to sign up today at the link that's on the screen now, which will also be linked down below. All right, so number 3 on my list was simply the word tea. Now, tea tends to be a term we use to describe any infusion of herbs to drink, but actually the word tea technically refers to a specific herb known as Camellia sinensis, which has been used for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, to create the beloved beverages that we know and love today. Green tea, black tea, and white tea all come from this same plant, but are treated differently to create different products. It's a naturally caffeinated concoction, so I tend to think of tea as something to use for an energy boost or with the intention to focus on getting something done. I work with it much in the same way as I would coffee as far as sort of magical connotations kind of go, but I think tea is much more versatile and more nuanced. Not only is it physically gentler on my body and mind, but it also can be used as a base for other magical tea blends. Since this video is already getting a bit long and we still have several plants to cover on my list, I'm going to invite you to stay tuned to the end of this video for the video that'll pop up on my end screen. It's one that I created last year about how to turn your morning coffee or tea drinking routine into a magical ritual to help you focus and accomplish what you want each day. Number 5 for me was houseplants, and I put houseplants as an entire category rather than breaking it up into individual species this time, because I wanted to list quote-unquote houseplant magic as just one of the 10 items on my list. The fact is, I don't have a ton of different types of houseplants at the moment. And instead of being harsh with myself and saying I'm not as good with houseplants as I am with garden plants, I'm instead going to practice what I preach about being gentle with ourselves and transmuting our perceived weaknesses into strengths through word magic and affirmations by instead using more empowering and kind words like, I haven't had quite as much success with houseplants as with garden plants so far because of the structure of the apartment I currently live in. I've always wanted to keep more houseplants, but because I used to move around a lot and I didn't feel that I had the time to focus on plants, I didn't really start actively collecting them until 2020, when it was the dead of winter and I realized I was going to be stuck inside for a while due to not just the weather, but the world. And I needed some greenery in my life, especially in this particular apartment where there really isn't a lot of nature in my immediate surroundings outside. I started learning as much as I possibly could about houseplants, and I brought home quite a few. And what I discovered with most of them was that they would seem to be doing okay for a while, but ultimately they didn't last long. At first, I thought this was purely due to something I was doing wrong, and to an extent, it kind of was. Because my past experience with plants was mainly in the context of outdoor gardening and food crops, I thought I was supposed to water them constantly. But as it turns out, most houseplants don't like too much water, and since they're not planted in the ground where water can disperse easily, and they don't have access to consistent sunlight, which would both cause them to grow faster and use more water, while also helping the water evaporate quickly, I was watering my indoor plants to death. Once I realized this and stopped being such a heavy-handed Aquarius, pouring and pouring that watering can on everything, things did start to look up. But by the time I learned this though, it was summer and I had a new lesson to learn. During the summer when sunlight was abundant, I was able to watch my plants thrive more, even the ones that were a few feet away from light sources. But as soon as the autumn equinox season rolled around, sunlight became scarce and my plants would have needed to be moved much closer to the windows. Unfortunately, I didn't realize this until it was too late for many of my plants, and for others, there wasn't really much I could have done to help them anyway, because there are really only 3 tiny windowsills in my apartment, none of which get any south-facing light at all. So if you don't know how the sun works, here in the northern hemisphere, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but especially in my location, the sun actually sort of tilts towards the south side of the sky. So if you're in a building, that, for example, has only windows on the north side of the house, you're really never going to get any direct sunlight in that window. In my particular apartment, I don't have any north or south facing windows or doors, but I do have east and west. My plants were either able to get morning light or evening light and nothing in between. And while I had gotten away with keeping lots of plants near the large glass doors on the east side in the summer, that didn't work once fall came. There's a 10-foot awning over my east-facing patio, and the south side of the patio is completely blocked by a brick wall. So once fall came, nowhere near enough light was reaching the houseplants that I had pushed up against the door of the patio. I even tried using grow lamps, but most of my plants just didn't even do much better with that. I'm not really sure why. Maybe I'll try it again sometime. I'm sure there were still options that I could have tried, or just a better way of going about things, but ultimately, what it's boiled down to for me now is that I've used this as a learning opportunity to discover which plants can do well in my space without constantly fighting an uphill battle. It ended up being a sort of survival of the fittest situation to see which plants would survive without much of a fuss, and those are the plants that are still alive in my home today. Even though succulents are supposed to like a lot of light, I found that my aloe vera as well as my sedum album don't seem to mind at all just living in my west-facing windowsill. They could probably get a lot larger with better lighting, but they're doing just fine. My jade plant is still growing strong as well, although there have been times when it's struggled a bit more than others. That plant in particular was given to me by a friend, so it has a little bit of a special meaning for me there, and I'm glad that I've been able to keep it alive. I also have a monstera plant that my sister gifted to me a few years ago. It's now been propagated into 2 different pots, and these are the largest plants that I have. And they did take a lot of damage a couple of years ago when I was out of town for a week and a half in the fall time. They weren't getting enough light near those glass doors, and I returned home to find that they were looking very sad. I've since moved them to my office desk, which is near one of the west-facing windows at the back of the house, and they're alive and kicking now, but I know they could be much happier and much bigger if I lived in a place where there was better light. My sister bought herself an identical plant that day, and in her home, which has tons of windows on 3 sides of the house, not just 2, and some south-facing light, her monstera has grown so large that she's had to propagate it into multiple different pots, and they're much larger, darker green, and stronger looking than mine. Lastly, I have some plants living under a grow lamp that's screwed into the socket in my headboard. While I've tried keeping other houseplants in a similar type of setup, the only ones that have truly seemed to be happy there have been my red shamrock and my foraged moss jars. So why did I tell you this seemingly mundane tale about my houseplant struggles and where I'm at with houseplants thus far? Well, for one, it's to illustrate the point that not all green witches have to be surrounded by a forest of houseplants like we tend to see in aesthetic images online. Some folks are really skilled at keeping plants alive indoors, while some others aren't. But what's even more important to remember is that if you're struggling with houseplants, your physical circumstances might be the problem, not you. I've lived in other apartments with better lighting, and I've not only gotten houseplants to be happier, but I've also even managed to grow herbs and small food crops in some of the south-facing windows. That's just not what I'm dealing with here in this particular building, and for now, I've learned to live with that and not blame myself. There are also other factors like the humidity in your home, the quality of the soil you're using, etc. If having lots and lots of houseplants is something you genuinely desire, I do believe there are ways to make almost any setting work with some tweaking. But it's important to ask yourself what kinds of resources you're going to have to expend, and if it will really make you happy to be putting in that kind of work. Personally, what I discovered is that while I'm very grateful for the few plants that are willing to live in my current home, what I was really desiring most when I started collecting houseplants was mainly just to feel surrounded by nature somehow, and I found other ways to achieve that feeling. I've accomplished that on a larger scale by accepting that I'm in not just a part of the world that's affected by seasons, but also a specific microclimate that makes my ability to be surrounded by plants very seasonal. Instead of collecting tons of houseplants in the summer only to watch them die in the dark days of winter, I've instead started putting my time, energy, and money into creating a seasonal outdoor garden on my balcony to get the most out of the growing season while it's here. Food crop plants and some outdoor flowers naturally want to grow vigorously during the warmer months, and then will be harvested and or composted once their season is over. I get to engage with them in a very cyclical way by bidding them farewell in the fall and then getting to start all over in the spring. There's a few months out of the year now when the only plants in my space are these few houseplants that are crammed into the west-facing windows. But once February, March rolls around, I'm starting seedlings on the windowsills and in a grow light setup, and it does temporarily give me that feeling of being in an indoor forest for these early spring months. Then my focus is shifted back out into the garden again. What's magical about it is how linked it is with my overall seasonal living practice. Being surrounded by greenery gets to be something I genuinely look forward to and am motivated to enjoy every minute of during certain times of the year, while other times there's a natural sense of downsizing and focusing my gratitude on just the few indoor plants that keep me company during the winter. While I honestly don't know or even really care too much what the supposed magical properties of my houseplants are, if there even are any, to me, they're more so just an overall representation of, again, the perseverance of nature with the help of human ingenuity. Kind of like the message of the Star Tarot card, which resonates with my sun sign of Aquarius. Most houseplants are tropical plants that really aren't native to or naturalized to my area at all. But by me using my human ingenuity to rearrange the elements in my home to create a hospitable environment for them, they're able to live and thrive and bring positive energy to the space. That in and of itself is alchemical and magical to me. And that's kind of the overall magical intention for my houseplants, and it's most perfectly embodied and exemplified by my moss jars. Quite a few years ago now, again in the dead of winter, I found myself desperately missing the sight of the green earth and the smell of dirt. And I made up my mind that when summer did come, I would create a miniature capsule of the forest floor to keep in my home all year. And that's exactly what I did. If you have never tried creating a self-sufficient ecosystem inside a terrarium, I highly recommend it. I even like to put little statues of the gods inside mine as a little miniature nature shrine. So in a nutshell, the magic of houseplants to me is simply to have something of the earth element present at all times to keep an ongoing connection with nature, regardless of how many you have or how big they are, or whether or not you use them for any specific magical purpose. And something to keep in mind is that even if your plants die every so often and you have to replace them, that is okay. Even though in the ideal world you would have this perfect relationship with this one plant for the rest of your life, sometimes that just isn't realistic. Think about it this way. Some green witches just have a relationship with cut flowers that they buy from the grocery store or from the florist. So if they can do that, you can have a relationship with potted plants that may or may not live for years and years. That's okay too. You're doing what you can and you're connecting to plants in whatever way works for you. So number 6 is beets. Now, beets are another plant whose place in my life and practice was also kind of a direct result of my desire to live seasonally and to be connected with the earth as much as possible, even in an apartment building. As I've mentioned earlier, a big part of my green witch journey for the past few years has been learning to grow a greener thumb, even with the elements seemingly stacked against me. In my ideal world, I would be able to grow most every type of produce that I like to eat and be fully immersed in the literal side of that plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle of nature. But since I don't have a lot of space or sunlight here, I've had to try many different types of crops on my balcony to see what would work and what wouldn't work. And for the second year in a row now, beets take the #1 spot for getting to experience the abundance of the harvest. As someone who is mostly vegetarian and really relies on hefty, filling vegetables to fill a large part of my diet, one of my biggest desires as a green witch is to be able to see a crop like that through from seed to harvest, because it very literally connects me to my food source, which is arguably one of the most magical things in the world, especially for those of us who have a nature-based spiritual path or consider ourselves pagan. While I've had no luck at all with things like squashes or potatoes here so far, and have had really inconsistent results from cucumbers and peppers, beets have come through for me every single time, and with very little effort. Being that I only have access to partial shade conditions, even things like broccoli and cauliflower only yield leaves and tiny florets, which are edible by the way. But the magical thing about beets is that I'm able to constantly harvest the hardy greens to use in place of anything in a recipe that would call for spinach, whether it be in cooked or raw recipes. And depending on how things have gone in the garden, I'll also later be able to harvest and eat the root bulb itself, be it small or large, which happens to be one of my favorite foods ever now. It's a food that I never even tried prior to my spiritual journey, so now it feels like a kind of special part of my seasonal living practice that allows me to truly feel like I'm an active participant in the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle of the seasons. I've even learned how to pickle beets recently, so I'll be able to still connect with the spirit of the garden that I've poured my love, intention, and gratitude into, even in the dead of winter. In this example, being a green witch is really just about my natural next step to being a seasonal witch and a kitchen witch, which is a totally valid way to connect with the magic of nature. It's about working with the elements of my environment to support and be supported physically by Mother Earth and Father Sun, which makes me feel connected to my place in the circle of life. Number 7 is thyme. Thyme is not only a versatile herb used in cooking, but also holds significant magical properties. It is often associated with purification and is believed to possess potent cleansing abilities comparable to, if not surpassing, the renowned sage herb. Its aromatic scent is used to ward off negative energies and promote healing, making it a popular choice for smudging rituals and spiritual cleansing practices as a whole. Additionally, thyme is believed to enhance psychic abilities and intuition, making it a valuable tool for divination and spell work. I do tend to use it for those traditional purposes too, especially since we have to be really careful of where or if we even source white sage. I often forego saging for smoke cleansing with thyme, where sage is mainly used for cleansing and resetting the energy of a space, or of yourself if you're passing your body through the smoke. Thyme is supposed to not only cleanse, but also protect you and your space as well, so it's kind of a 2-in-1. And here's a fun tip for you. Don't have a smoke cleansing wand or an herb bundle to use? Make what I like to call a sage cigarette. No, you're not going to smoke it like a cigar, although I think you could do that. Don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. But just take a sticky note or any small sheet of paper and some glue and form a funnel shape. Place this somewhere where it'll be able to stand upright like in a candle holder, and fill it with loose kitchen cabinet varieties of things like sage, thyme, rosemary, basil, or any herb that matches your intention. One thing I will warn you is that you probably don't want to burn straight cinnamon because it can be a respiratory irritant, but most of the things that you would put into, say, a pot of soup can work pretty well. So carefully light the top of the herbs and the top tips of the paper and fan it a few times with your hand or a feather or like a hand fan to get the embers burning. Now you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have a fire-safe plate or something underneath to catch the ashes. This is just as good as any sage stick, and if you're using the really affordable kitchen herbs that you can find at bargain stores, this is a super accessible and affordable option for magical cleansing or herbal spells. And you don't have to worry about buying white sage sticks knowing that they might be irresponsibly sourced and bad for our environment, or if you're concerned about the cultural appropriation aspect of it as it pertains to Native American culture. Now, on a more personal level, I just love growing fresh thyme and kind of just any of the culinary herbs in general because it's beautiful, fragrant, and a magical protective herb that you can have in your garden or on your windowsill. Back when I lived in my old house at the beginning of my witchy journey, I planted one of those little pots of thyme that you can find in the produce section of the grocery store in my backyard, and it grew beautifully. It had little white fairy-like flowers on it, and when winter came, it actually somehow stayed alive and well under the snow. On the winter solstice that year, I actually went out and dug some up to use in a ritual, and it was oh so magical. Admittedly, I haven't ever gotten it to grow so abundantly in a pot, in an apartment situation, and I've never gotten it to grow from seed either, but I keep buying those little pots every time that my previous one dies on me. Or I can water propagate it from cut pieces that they sell in packages in the produce section. It'll live for a while in a sunny spot, and then when it inevitably dries out and gives up, I just use it either in my kitchen magic or by bundling it into a smoke cleanse bundle. Being a green witch is about connecting with your favorite plants however you can, even if it isn't perfect. And here's another little tip for culinary herbs like thyme, sage, rosemary, basil, etc. Make any meal that you're already planning on cooking into a magical meal simply by selecting or using herbs with intention. This can look like planning a meal based around the magical correspondences of the herbs you want to use, or like me, you can flip that on its head and just cook whatever you want while just being mindful of the correspondences of the herbs that happen to be in the recipe or that go well with the flavor of the meal. Sometimes this looks just like throwing each herb in while saying salt for purification, pepper for protection, sage for cleansing. Or other times it looks like just chanting one of my incantations in my head while I'm mindfully seasoning my food. Feel free to do this whatever way feels most natural for you, and trust that you're putting good vibes into your food however you decide to go about it. Number 8 is chamomile. Chamomile is another culinary / magical / medicinal herb that's very easy to access at any grocery store. While I've only ever gotten it to start from seed just this past year for the first time, and full disclosure, it never made it past seedling size before eventually drying up on me this past week, that is okay. It's perfectly fine to just work with the plants in their dried form if that's all you're able to do. Chamomile has long been recognized for its medicinal properties, including its ability to help calm and center the mind and body. And whether you've had a busy day or you're experiencing an anxiety attack, a soothing cup of chamomile tea can provide a sense of relaxation and promote a peaceful state of being. Its gentle aroma and natural compounds work together to alleviate stress and promote a sense of well-being, making it a popular choice for those seeking natural remedies for anxiety or stress management. Now, I will say, I know some people who are horribly allergic to chamomile, so just bear that in mind if you've never tried it before. What's interesting to me about chamomile as a magical herb is that it's typically associated with the fire element because its flower resembles the sun. I tend to think of fiery energy as being busy, passionate, and possibly even embodying sacred rage or the warrior archetype. But this plant is ruled by the sign of Leo specifically, and it shows us kind of the softer side of the fire element, the more playful, relaxing, and basking in the sun like a lion type energy. While it does make a great addition to any bedtime routine, especially blended with lavender or other sleepy type herbs, I most often find myself reaching for pure lavender, at least, during the day when the sun is up, when I'm busy working and maybe I'm feeling that anxious kind of busyness or excitement, and I want to be able to calm down a bit so I can focus my passion and creativity towards something productive. I'm not sure if this is how others interact with this herb, but that's how it works well for me, and that's kind of what forming your own herbal correspondences or building upon your understanding of traditional correspondences is all about. Number 9 is squash. So okay, I know we're less than a week away from the autumn equinox, and you're probably getting in the mood to start talking about the magical correspondences of pumpkins and squashes. But I'm going to shorten this already really long video by directing you to another video. Last year, I did a full episode entirely devoted to the cultural correspondences of squashes, as well as the story of my own personal connection to them. So after this video, I invite you to give that one a watch as you're getting geared up for pumpkin spice season. So I will link that one at the end of this video as well. And finally, number 10 is the apple. Apples for me are right up there with pumpkins when it comes to seasonal traditions. Living in Western New York ever since I was a kid, apple picking has always been a cherished seasonal tradition that I would look forward to every year. It's another one of those things that has strong family connections for me, since apple picking was something that I did with my family as a child. In my adult life, I made a tradition out of dragging friends and boyfriends to go because my family lived far away throughout my 20s. Thankfully now, 2 of my siblings have moved home during the pandemic and decided to stay for a while, so last year we got to bring the tradition back together for the first time in over a decade. On a more witchy level though, the apple is an important symbol for me, not only because I learned early in my path that it contains within its core the symbol of the pentagram as well as the symbol of the womb of the goddess, but also because it's connected to the autumn equinox, which was the very first Sabbath that I ever celebrated on my witchy journey. If you've been watching my videos or listening to my podcast for a while, you've probably heard this story before, but if you're new, first of all, welcome. I'm so grateful that you're here and still listening at this point in what turned into quite a long episode. And I would love it if you would comment below saying hello and introducing yourself, by the way. But to briefly tell the tale, I first found my seasonal witch/nature witch path when I discovered the Wheel of the Year through the portal of the autumn equinox. Back in September 2014, when I had been on my spiritual awakening journey for a few years and had only read one actual witchcraft book and had been doing more witchy style spells and rituals for about a year, I still felt like I hadn't quite found my real niche in the witchy and spiritual world. I had dabbled here and there with a lot of ideas and had had enough success in both my inner and outer world to know that I was on to something with this whole intuitive living idea. But I still felt like something big was missing. I wasn't really into gods and goddesses at the time and was craving a deeper sense of connection to something bigger than just myself. I wanted a closer connection with nature. I knew that fall had always been my favorite season, and I thought I had heard in passing somewhere that things like solstices and equinoxes held some kind of magical or spiritual meaning. So I finally looked it up, and boy did I find myself down a rabbit hole. I started studying the Wheel of the Year and realizing that the seasonal witch path was the path for me. The one witchcraft book that I had read the previous year that had been given to me by a friend was Everyday Magic by Dorothy Morrison. It was not at all a seasonal witchcraft book, but I had noticed when I was reading it that it had listed strange words I had never heard before as some of the correspondences of certain herbs and crystals in the index. Words like lugnasad and mabon and samhain. Now I was finally learning what those words meant and how to pronounce them, and that they represented a spiritual path that was centered around celebrating the turning of the wheel, similarly to the way I had always naturally made up my own little rituals and traditions to celebrate seasons. It was a full circle moment and a match made in heaven. Other than the fact that I didn't fully resonate with all the Celtic and Wiccan traditions and beliefs related to the seasons, which was kind of all you would find online about the Wheel of the Year at the time. So I just took inspiration from what I was learning and I started crafting my own self-care and personal development oriented version of the seasonal themes, and the rest is history. Hence pretty much the entire concept of my podcast, my YouTube channel, and the practices we do in the Writing Witch Coven, where whether you're Celtic or Wiccan or not, we can all look at these natural cycles that the year goes through as sacred times to do whatever feels genuinely magical to us. But anyway, circling back around to the symbol of the apple, that first year of celebrating Mabon, I went apple picking and decorated my home with the apples for the Sabbath, and I used them to make apple pies with positive intentions in them. And I hosted a women's circle to celebrate the autumn equinox where we all ate these apple pies. So apples now bring up all of those magical memories along with all the ones from my childhood. So magical mavens, what would be on your top 10 list of herbs and plants in your own personal green witch journey? I would love to see your list in the comments. Has this video inspired you to get back into your green witch practice or to try something new? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And I'd also be so grateful if you could like this video so that the YouTube gods know it was worth watching. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to sign up for the Empowered Modern Witches Summit, which is starting so soon on September 18th. And here are those videos I mentioned earlier about coffee/tea magic and the one about pumpkin/squash magic. As always, thank you so much for being your magical self in the world, and until next time, blessed be.